The origin of human rights is conscience. A country is made up of its people, and people are governed by their hearts. So our hearts is the most important thing to make sure that any declaration, any words are put into action to make sure that human kindness can prevail. And in fact, we have two speakers today who are great examples, in my opinion, of individuals who abide by their conscience and shine in our world with their kindness and love. We are excited for them to join us today and share with us their thoughts on Human Rights Day and how we can ensure dignity, freedom, and justice for all. And we would like to welcome His Excellency Mr. Anthony Carmona, our former President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. And also with us is Dr. Kuiljeit Uppaal, world's first image scientist and also a philanthropist. So we have views from different aspects today. And first, we'd like to say hello and welcome for His Excellency Mr. Carmona's comments on today. Welcome, Your Excellency.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes. Okay, I am burdened with the reality of doing a 1-minute self-introduction. And of course, that is always a difficult proposition. But I can say at the onset that I have been president. I'm the 5th and former president of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago between 2013 and 2018. Apart from that, before I assumed office, I was a prosecutor in the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions. I was in the substantive position of Deputy Director of Public Prosecutions, acting as the Director of Public Prosecution in my country. Subsequently, I joined the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia and the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda as an appeals counsel in Den Haag. And of course, I was in the appellate section, and we dealt with crimes against humanity, genocide, war crimes, and essentially dealing with situations where human dignity was violated in its most egregious forms. Subsequently, in fact, I came back to Trinidad, where I was a Supreme Court judge of my country for approximately 10 years, and then subsequently I was elected as an international criminal court. Before I assumed my substantive post as a judge, having been sworn in, I was asked to be president of my country, and I acceded to that request. In the context of, I can tell you, however, that I have sought to ensure the proliferation and protection of human rights for all through the implementation of progressive people-centered initiatives at all levels in whatever capacity I engaged in. And as a judge, I also engaged in judicial activism where I felt it met the ends of justice. But more importantly, the crux of my daily mantra was always to treat people like people. And I felt that if we do this, we can create an environment that will not facilitate man's inhumanity to man. I can tell you, for example, that in terms of protecting human rights and fostering dignity, freedom, and justice for all, I think we always need to look at the human rights system in the spirit of the Declaration as part of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And that is, in fact, no one must be left behind. We are celebrating the 75th anniversary of the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And in that regard, we are also celebrating the common heritage of humankind. I can indicate to you that 75 years after the adoption of the Declaration, we must ask ourselves whether the adoption of that landmark human rights instruments, including human rights treaties on women, children, persons with disabilities, and an instrument against racial discrimination, have brought us closer to achieving the promises entrenched in that declaration, like human dignity, freedom, and justice. You see, the bottom line is that we are in fact confronted daily by crimes that shock the collective conscience of all right-thinking people. And the bottom line is that, in fact, we have witnessed, and if I may succinctly put this in one paragraph, we have succinctly continued to witness we have witnessed and continue to witness too many blind eyes being turned to the assassination of journalists for reporting the news independently, ironically on the violation of the human rights of people who continue to be marginalized in their own homeland, as if their right to a country with defined borders, stable government, and settled population are dispensable. Is this fostering dignity, freedom, and justice for all? Or is it discrimination on the grounds of race, religion, and freedom of the press? How else can one describe the continued failure to agree to the prosecution of those who murder journalists? Is this what we must accept 75 years after the adoption of the Declaration and the subsequent adoption of what we term as historic and legally binding human rights treaties? Finally, freedom of conscience and assembly are cardinal principles which go hand in hand with the enjoyment of human rights. Nevertheless, on a daily basis, we are made aware of the utilization of the death penalty to stifle and eliminate individuals who dare to confront politicians by peaceful means over the abuse of their oath of office and abuse of the rule of law. Again, in fact, I just thought I would indicate this as my opening salvo in order to give a sense of flesh to our discussion or panel discussion on human rights, and more particularly on the question of human dignity, freedom, and justice. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carmona. I know we have more thoughts and ideas from you later, and I think it would be interesting for us to hear as well from your experience and the notes, the 3 notes that you highlighted. How are some ways we can further? There are issues in front of us, and what are some ways from your experience and what you're looking on in the future can we all participate in this move to make sure the rights are protected, that everyone sees these issues and how to overcome them? And welcome back again, Mr. Carmona, on your thoughts on today and all the topic.
We must be honest with ourselves, and we must be true to our conscience. Because if world leaders' dispensations are grounded in conscience, do you think, for example, that Putin's Cold War strategies in Europe with regard to energy, or the callous and criminal acts meted out to Iranian women, will be Iranian women's consent-driven action? Do you think, in fact, that will occur? Are we satisfied with the treatment of migrants globally displaced either through the effects of climate change or the results of poor and tyrannic leadership or the lack of basic needs with healthcare? We look all around. We see human crises in the Horn of Africa, Sudan, Ethiopia, Afghanistan, and Ukraine. And this is why it is so important for us to adhere to the rule of law. Because with the rule of law, there will be inclusivity. And this is why I've always maintained my mantra, always treat people like people. Because at the end of the day, if you treat people equally, if you give people equal opportunity, and if in fact you engage in equality of treatment, we will have in fact a better and safer world. But it is not taking place. And this is why, for example, I always adhere to promulgating the International Criminal Court. That is, in fact, in my view, will not only protect the international rule of law, but will also bring civility, comity, and more important, equality of treatment by way of a court jurisdiction. And I think this is important when, for example, we're looking at human rights, because when I was prosecuting camp commanders, politicians, and generals in the former Yugoslavia, and persons coming out of the Rwanda scenario, you know, what is demonstrated is the sheer callousness that took place in the context of crimes against humanity, war crimes, and genocide. And I feel, for example, in that regard, that even the work of the conscience should be fully appreciated if taught in schools, because I think it is very important that we engage our young people through a process of education to recognize their global responsibility as global citizens, to ensure that you are your brother's keeper, and more importantly, to ensure that in fact a culture of peace through conscious-driven action.
Thank you, Mr. Carmona. It's very important to start small. A lot of the ideas we have now started when we were younger, right? How to treat people, how to respect people. I remember going through my kind of unsettling stages of life and kind of blaming everyone for the issue. I don't like this because, they did that to me. And I would, at the end of the day, my dad would say to me, he or she always has a good side too. And it's that type of idea that taught me to grow up having a further understanding and kind of appreciation for each other instead of setting on kind of just blowing on the negative of things. So thank you for bringing that to the table as well. And maybe we can hear a little from Dr. Uppaal, and later if Mr. Carmona, you have anything to add and kind of further the conversation, very welcome to do so. I'd like to take this moment to welcome Dr. Uppaal and your thoughts on Human Rights Day.
Namaste, good evening, everyone. It's a matter of great honor here to be listening to such beautiful thoughts. And I was listening to him very carefully, and I kind of was like, wow, this is so good. This is so fantastic. I was nodding my head vigorously while he was talking, and I was completely in accordance with what he said. So I think as far as I'm concerned, I do know that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is a milestone document for the world that proclaims the indisputable rights which everyone has been entitled to as a human being, regardless of race, color, religion, sex, language, nationality, social origin, property, birth, or even status. And I'm sure you'd agree with me when I say that changing times and changing scenarios will prompt and should propel new ways of looking at things. And in line with this thought, we have seen that the human rights laws are also probably constantly evolving. And today, as we commemorate more than 7 decades of the existence and implementation of this milestone document, as well as the 2022 theme, Dignity, Freedom, and Justice for All, we must acknowledge that human rights have become more recognized across the globe. There is a larger global dialogue today for an expanding system of human rights protection that focuses on vulnerable groups such as people with disabilities, indigenous peoples and migrants, etc. So it's a good start, I'd say. And I think that the underlying rationale to this is that we understand that human rights are at the heart of the United Nations SDGs, because in the absence of human dignity, we cannot hope to drive any sustainable development. So one needs to understand the hand-in-glove system between the two, the balancing of equation. Human rights are driven by progress on all SDGs, and SDGs are driven by advancements on human rights. The fact is that the world has been facing challenges in the recent times, some new and some ongoing ones. For example, we've seen the pandemic, conflicts, exploding inequalities, racism, and climate change. From my perspective, if one looks at the key points to ensure human rights protection in today's times, I think the focus has to be on recovery, on building back what we may have lost over time, keeping human rights as a core element in the entire process. We will reach our common global goals only if we are able to create equal opportunities for all, address our failures exposed and exploited by all these challenges, and apply human rights standards to tackle deep-rooted intergenerational inequalities, exclusions, and discrimination. Today, the 10th of December, is an opportunity to reiterate the importance of human rights in rebuilding the world we want, and the need for global solidarity, as well as our interconnectedness and shared humanity. To start off with, I think Every article in the declaration should prevail strongly. There's no debate about that. If we look at one of the biggest global crises in the recent years, I believe it was the COVID-19 pandemic. Just as an example, sadly, the COVID crisis fueled and accentuated a few things: intensified poverty, rising inequalities, discriminations that are deep-rooted, and many other cavities in the human rights protection. Unless we fill those cavities and bridge the gaps and advance human rights, only then can we fully recover and build back a world that is more resilient, more just, and sustainable. While there would be multiple aspects to ensure human rights protection in the current times, let me, as a global citizen, share a few key points which I think are imperative. Firstly, I think it's very important to end discrimination of all kinds. We cannot have structural discrimination and racism that will only fuel the crisis in the wrong direction. So equality and non-discrimination are primary requirements for the post-COVID world. Secondly, we also need to look at another pandemic of sorts. And I've often harped on this. This is running in parallel, the inequality pandemic. And for that, we need to promote and protect social, economic, and cultural rights and create a new era. Thirdly, we need to understand what our rights are and then stand up, not just for yourself, but also for others. We need to realize that all of us are in it together, from you and me and people in our neighborhood and communities and civil society to governments and the private sector. Pretty much everyone has a role to play in building a beautiful post-COVID world where we are today. And we need to encourage participation and solidarity for a better present and a beautiful future for the coming generations. Inequalities and any form of human rights violations harms not just the lives of those who endure it, but also society as a whole. We need to remember that we all lose in a global society that is characterized by discrimination, division, distrust, intolerance, and hatred. And we all have to play a part in building a world beyond all of this. We need to renew our thinking as governments and its peoples, rebuild trust if required, and embrace a shared and comprehensive vision of human rights. And needless to say, it should be on the lines promoting sustainable development for people and the planet. Let's not forget that the UDHR is a global blueprint for international, national, and local laws and policies, and a bedrock of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Being an educationist, I think I have to make a mention of its importance in our lives in this context. The right to education has been defined in the Article 26 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, with the declaration calling for free and compulsory elementary education. We've all probably heard some meaningful thoughts shared by well-known people like the Nobel Peace Laureate Malala Yousafzai, who once said, "One child, one teacher, one book, and one pen can change the world." Or for that matter, Mr. Nelson Mandela, who rightly called education the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. A catastrophe like the COVID-19 pandemic, as I've mentioned as an example earlier too, has led to an unprecedented disruption in education and learning on a global scale, affecting more than 1.6 billion students over 190 countries. Education is the key to sustainable development. So we need to recover and revitalize education. We need to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education with the goal to increase collaboration and international solidarity, to place education and lifelong learning opportunities for all at the center of global recovery, while also transforming towards a more inclusive, safe, and sustainable society. We must also ensure that the education we provide should help individuals to fully develop their personalities, talents, and abilities. It should teach them to understand their own rights and to respect other people's rights, cultures, and differences. It should help them to live peacefully and protect the environment they live in. Education is a powerful tool which can aid people out of poverty and provide them with promising futures. Despite this, about 265 million children and adolescents around the world do not have an opportunity to enter or complete school. This is a violation of their human right to education. The world cannot afford a generation of children and young people who lack the skills they need to compete in the 21st century economy. Nor can we afford to leave behind half of humanity. Additionally, the lack of inclusive quality education hinders countries from achieving gender equality and breaking the cycle of poverty, which leaves millions of children, youth, and adults behind. All people have rights, no matter who they are, where they live, what language they speak, what their religion is, what they think, what they look like, what their gender identity is, whether they have a disability or not, whether they are rich or poor, and no matter who their parents or families are, or what their parents and families believe or do. No person on Mother Earth should be withheld from the basic right of education and all the other rights that we talk of in terms of human rights for any reason. And governments must do whatever they can to make sure that every citizen in their countries can enjoy the rights they deserve. So in a nutshell, from my perspective, the way forward includes measures like, 1, we need to end discrimination of all kinds. 2, we need to address the inequality pandemic that I just mentioned. 3, we need to understand what our rights are and then stand up not just for yourself, but also for others. 4, we need to renew our thinking as governments and its peoples and embrace a shared and comprehensive vision of human rights. 5, we need to recover and revitalize education to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education. And lastly, it will be very helpful to read the Universal Declaration of Human Rights to be better informed as global citizens.
Thank you, Dr. Uppaal. Beautifully said last one, right? And it comes in many different languages, hopefully to be accessible to everyone around the world. And I love how you mentioned standing from a world citizen's perspective. And I know you are a woman of many roles. And I just wanted to elaborate a little bit on one little tip you like to share with everyone, because this idea of protecting dignity and respecting everyone, ending this discrimination, I think it's very important. Maybe it's something that you do to help you at the start of the day, because I think a lot of the issues is I want to do that, but maybe throughout the day, some things happen emotionally, physically, that stops me from fulfilling the words that I had put out at the beginning of the day. So maybe there is a tip that you use when you start your day or a project to help yourself be in a mindset where I'm going to be open-minded. And maybe it comes easy to you, but I think these tips might be helpful for all of us when we are faced with challenges at the global or even individual levels. What are your thoughts on that?
That's a great question. And I pretty much, I think, echo what His Excellency just mentioned in terms of just being human. I think the core and the essence of being human itself is so humongous if one looks at it very deeply. I think just being human makes all the goodness happen. And when that starts, the journey itself is beautiful and very empowering, not just for oneself, but also for others. And of course, conscience, because I think that is the genesis of every human being. And for me, like I probably earlier shared, I think that if you have an active conscience from within, you know, that part of the mind that tells you what you're doing is right or wrong, it's a good guiding light to move ahead with. So I think as far as I'm concerned, personally speaking, the first thing that I would typically do when I wake up in the morning is to tell myself good messages, to tell myself that I have this beautiful thing called conscience inside me that is going to be my guiding light. And that is that beautiful and critical aspect of my thinking process, because it's going to help me to demarcate my way ahead, to distinguish what I should do, what I should not do. And I should let that voice that's within me speak from within and then go forward. So I think you need to trust your conscience, because it is your confidant, it is your closest friend, and your conscience, most importantly, never lies to you. So you know that if you have an active conscience and you're listening to it actively all the while, chances are very remote that you would go wrong. And let that be your guiding factor in life. I think that, for me, is imperative. So I think as long as we're listening, we're good to go.
Very beautiful. Thank you, Dr. Uppaal. Yes, and I think once we get into the habit of listening to our conscience, it's going to be so loud that it'd be hard for us to stray away from the right path. Thank you for adding to that. And back to you, Mr. Carmona. What are your thoughts? Dr. Uppaal mentioned ending some deep-rooted discriminations, and I know in your position, you're often faced with big decisions and maybe ideas you want to further elaborate on how to protect human rights, especially how do we end discrimination all around?
Well, I think in fact something that is a very, very concerning is whether there has been a failure in our education systems in terms of creating individuals who are holistic, compassionate, and considerate. I do agree with, in fact, that very salutary expose by Dr. Uppaal, emphasizing that education is a powerful tool. But you know something, when in fact I look at leaders who are in fact doctrinaire, who are in fact egotistical, who basically are selfish, I have found time and time again that they are well educated. And I often wonder why it is are we producing so many educated monsters? Because at the end of the day, is this a reflection of social engineering? Is it a reflection of our failing in the education system? Because what I have found over the years is that whereas the educated man is there to basically protect human rights, he's there, he knows about human rights. Very often, in fact, the educated leader is the one who subjugates persons, who create an environment where, for example, political parties and the motives and the agendas of political parties become paramount to national issues, where, in fact, for example, sometimes educated people create a cult politics, where, in fact, the political party is viewed in a more engaging light than national goals and objectives. So I feel, for example, sometimes we need to humanize our educational processes so that we build better individuals who will invariably become leaders of our country. Because I always tell persons, I said, the student of today is the executive of tomorrow. And I often tell persons that all the solutions that in fact we seek are to be found in the classrooms of the world. Because if you build capacity, invariably you will build consent-driven action, you will build individuals who would believe in doing the right thing because it is the right thing to do, and doing good and being good becomes facets of human interconnectivity. I think it is not necessarily a pipe dream to feel that, for example, these things are possible. To create a culture of peace, an environment of peace, where people are respected, where people are integrated, where people are given a fair chance, where people are treated equally, where there is equality of opportunity, and more importantly, the importance of the rule of law. Because everything goes back to the rule of law. Because if you have courts in the various countries who are independent of the executive, if you have courts in various countries who are creative thinkers, who are innovative thinkers, you would find the law can be used, the interpretation of the law can be used in a manner to ensure that human rights are protected. I can tell you, in fact, based on my reading of, for example, Indian jurisprudence, some persons have questioned the efficacy of judicial activism. But I see the judicial activism as a main proponent of human rights, especially in the country of India, where the average man is able to have his rights vindicated before a court of law, and not based on money, status, influence, or affluence. And I think if we are looking at the whole concept of human dignity, we're looking at freedom, and we're looking at justice. It all goes back to ensuring that that arm of the state called the judiciary must be given resources and must also be encouraged to be resilient and to be guardians of constitutions and custodians of constitutions, and in that regard, becoming guardians of the rule of law. Because if the rule of law is invoked in every part of the world, I can tell you there will be no suffering. There will be no discrimination. Because the rule of law is about ensuring that right is done to all manner of persons. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Carmona, for the addition at the end, towards the end of our discussion. And I think we mentioned some of the very core aspects of how we can further the protection of human rights, starting with a very important education. And I think it's not just about the knowledge, from what I'm understanding of both of our speakers. It's not just about the knowledge, but truly, truly about how we all began as human beings the day we were born. It was the heart, the compassion that we have innate within all of us, and allowing that to shine. We will allow the world to shine as well the same way. And that positive force sometimes is beyond our imagination, the way it could carry all of us together. And so we hope more and more of our friends could participate on this type of practice every day, if you will, and to share the positive energy that we've gained growing up, and then to share with everyone else. Any last comments before we end the discussion panel today?
Well, I think in fact I should mention that, you know, we always talk about the man in the mirror. And I always tell persons, I said, sometimes generally I find the man in the mirror is pretty okay. The problem, in fact, is the man standing next to you who doesn't have a mirror to look into and whose mirror is clouded. And many times I find the problem has been where individuals, instead of bringing the man without a mirror across to your mirror, we join him in his darkness, you know. And because I feel sometimes we do not appreciate fully the power of love, the power of independence, the power of resilience, and the power of vision. Because I have found over the years as a judge, dealing with a lot of criminals over my lifetime, and especially with regard to young criminals, if you give them, through your judicial dispensation, a sense of their self-worth, a sense of their self-esteem, and you tell them basically that you are somebody, you are not a number. And I think this is what causes a lot of distress when people feel inconsequential. They feel unimportant. But more importantly, when they feel that they are the servants of the politicians, and the politicians are not the servants of the people. And that has been the problem all along. Because when you look at, for example, democracy has become a situation where politicians entrench their power to suit their own selfish motives. And somewhere along the line, they have forgotten, hey, your business is not about yourself. Hey, your business is not about your political party. Your business is about for the people, by the people, and of the people. You are the servants of the people. The people are not your servants. And I think if politicians throughout the world recalibrate to engage that philosophy, we can have a better world, a world of wonderful conscience. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carmona. The recalibration, very important. And Mr. Carmona was saying the man in the mirror, and I feel honored and delighted that I'm looking at my camera with the Zoom, and almost in a way I'm not only looking at myself, but I'm looking at Dr. Uppaal, I'm looking at Mr. Carmona. You guys are my man and woman in my mirror today, and I feel encouraged and empowered. Thank you so much for joining us and then sharing your thoughts. And very important ideas today were brought up, and we hope our viewers feel as inspired as I do, and hope. I feel the hope from our conversation today. There are people who understand we need to further these conversations, make sure more people are on board with these conscience-driven actions. With love, the power of love, we can do many, many things. Once again, thank you to our beautiful speakers today for your beautiful comments. Thank you for joining us today. And so delighted